hand over. That was an apt point to transition, because I'll hand over to colleagues, to Maxam and to Gabrielle Abraham from Mona GeoInformatics Institute, who are going to be talking to us about mapping hurricane resilience.
Okay. Good morning again, everyone. So I'm Maxam, and Gabrielle and I, we're with the Mona GeoInformatics Institute. You're seeing a video here playing Full Mystery. I'm going to see if I can just play it for you again. This video that we're playing is a drone shot that was taken, or drone video, while on our field work. While conducting our field work in Dominica. Gabrielle is from Dominica, I'm from Jamaica, so we're both from the Caribbean. And as Caribbean islands, we have a lot in common. We can both relate to devastation caused by hurricanes. And it's through resilience that we've learned a lot of these key lessons, and that's what we wanted to bring out in this project today. So through the CC, well, I call it the Triple C project. Through the Triple C project, we aim to document and showcase these strengths, that is the things that allow us to adapt and recover quickly in good time from these cyclones. So MGI, through a lot of the work that we've done, we aim to provide a lot of the maps, the analysis, certain tools as well in geographic information systems. And this not only tells the story of survival, through a lot of the technology that we bring to the project, but also hopefully is going to support the case for Dominica to implement further interventions, especially to draw down on the funding that's very much needed to continue with resilience. Even after all these years, as you'll see with a lot of our outcomes from the project, there still is a bit of a way to go in terms of recovery. So this, of course, this is what I think was brilliant about this project as the brainstorm of Adam, Annabelle, and the rest of the team, is that it does contribute directly to Dominica's goal of becoming one of the most climate resilient countries. And that's part of their recovery plan from 2020 to 2030. Now you'll hear us throw around this word a lot, resilience. And resilience is defined as the ability of a system or community or society which has been exposed to harmful impacts of hazards, in this case tropical cyclones, to adapt and recover in a timely and efficient manner. So this is crucial that as a people, as a nation, as a society, we're able to to rebound, to bounce back, but in a good time. Now what we're trying to do is to look at this in a very objective way. And again, this I think goes to the strength of the project. Adam comes with a lot of the artistic and social lens on this project. But what we want to do is come with a technology now that can say, okay, we can put a percentage to the number of buildings that have recovered or the places that have recovered, and do so through our mapping and technology. So let's see. Some of it, you may agree with or may not agree with, but this is what we're able to map, and this is what we could objectively bring out from a lot of the mapping. So I'll just quickly say a bit on who we are. The Mona GeoInformatics Institute is a university-owned company, and we're based in Kingston, Jamaica, but we work throughout the Caribbean. And we've been providing spatial solutions and services to the public and private sector, both locally and internationally. We've been established since 2004, and our divisions are like environmental and hazards modeling, software development, human and social mapping, business mapping and profiling as well, and technical services like the drone services and simulations and so on. So we do have this experience across 12 Caribbean countries, including Dominica. It's not the first project that we've carried out in Dominica, so we do have, some familiarity with the island. And we not only look at things like shoreline and land cover change analysis, but also we do a lot of software development, designing databases, and so on. So myself, I'm the director at MGI, and Gabrielle came on through the CCC project as a research associate. So our key role on the project was to lead Work Package 5. And Work Package 5 focused on geoinformatics, citizen science, and disaster risk reduction in the mapping of hurricane resilience and documenting Dominican place-based knowledge of cyclonic hazards. So MGI sought to capture and depict these impacts and resilience through drone mapping, cartography, spatial analysis. We used a lot of in-field based building assessments, and of course went on to do analysis such as exposure, vulnerability, and hazards modeling. Now throughout the presentation, especially as Gabrielle takes over, you'll hear us speak about things like exposure. What is exposure? In out of the scientific work we do, exposure is like the assets. It's like the tangible thing that you see, such as your population, your buildings, your properties, livelihoods, that can be impacted in a hazard-prone area. So the TKIs, houses, the people that rely on the shoreline for their businesses, for where they live and so on, if this can be impacted by flood, storm surge, extreme wind, then it's an asset, it's an exposure. Then you hear us mention vulnerability as well. Vulnerability being that characteristic and circumstance of the community or the system or the assets that will make it more susceptible to the damaging effect of the hazard. So is it because of how this house is built, why it may be more prone to being swept away or broken apart when a hurricane impacts? That's part of its vulnerability. So is there the ability to resist the hazard? That's very, very important. And then of course we come down to the hazard. So the main hazard of focus here are tropical storms. And we know this is something that, throughout recorded history has been a crucial part of trying to document and to understand. The artist that was featured in the beginning, I think he put it so well when he mentioned that a lot of what we're observing and we're feeling and that impacts us is because of a flow of energy. Energy is something that, it can't be destroyed. It has to go from one place to another. And a lot of times, it's how we are able to withstand what energy is doing around us or how we're able to take advantage of it that makes a difference to how our lives are improved. And this is the base of what we're trying to do here, to improve lives and to make sure that people can adapt and survive. So I'll hand over to Gabrielle.
Okay, so for our part of the project, like Abba would have mentioned, basically I'm going to take you through the 3 phases that our package followed. So phase 1, that was pre-field work in Jamaica. So when I first came onto the project, I was in Jamaica for a few months and we were gathering data and sort of figuring out, okay, how are we going to go about the areas that we're going to select, as well as what we're going to do to sort of map and put mapping hurricane recovery and resilience. What are we going to do to put that down on paper? So the first thing, we ran geospatial models. So geospatial, GIS, that's Geographic Information Systems, for those who are not familiar. It's basically like mapping software, spatial analysis, looking at the Earth from above, essentially, in a nutshell. So we gathered a lot of the exposure, vulnerability, and hazard data, like Abby was saying, and we created different layers over Dominica. So that would mean that essentially I had an exposure layer where I incorporated all our roads, like we see here, all our buildings, bridges, any sort of infrastructure, anything that could be impacted by a storm or that will go into our exposure layer. Then our vulnerabilities, we could map social vulnerabilities using like location and community and parish data, for example. So parishes that have a very high, above average poverty rate, these tend to be more vulnerable than other communities which are with a much lower poverty rate. For example, communities with older populations within the parish, probably communities with many disabled people within that parish or that community. So we're able to map the locations of these vulnerabilities. And then the hazards that we use included inland flooding, which would be flooding from the rivers in a storm scenario, storm surge, which is flooding from the sea during a hurricane where the sea comes in and floods inland. Historical landslides, so where landslides have occurred based on the geology, and extreme winds, because of course Dominica is very mountainous. For those of you who may not know, generally you have a ton of mountains and volcanoes. The entire island is a big mountain, but most of the higher ones, they come right down the middle of the island. And of course that's going to impact your exposure to the winds, because if you have a high intensity storm, the people who are high up on top of the hill, well exposed, nothing sort of protecting them, your house is literally just going to be fully exposed to the full force of the wind versus somebody who is more cocooned at the bottom or within a valley or something like that. So we use wind as well. So when we combined all that model in the software using ArcGIS software, and we came up with the hotspots. So essentially, well, it was hotspots and cold spots, but of course we're looking at the hotspots. So the hotspots would be the areas that are the most vulnerable to hazards. So we have areas like Lubia, Roseau, a lot of the villages along the coast like Maho, Massac. We have Marigot up in the north, some of the Kalnago territory, Kulibistri as well, and just Petit Savan for sure, some of Granby. So these are basically some of the very vulnerable areas. Casa Bruce was one as well, and those of you keeping up on news in Dominica would have seen that Casa Bruce was basically flooded yesterday, and loads of landslides and people's houses going down. So it's definitely a vulnerable area where there's a lot of water. And then, just so a close-up so you can see what the map was essentially showing. This would be Roseau. So the areas in red is the highest confidence, which is 99%, which means these are the areas where everything sort of layered, because there was a score. So you can have a building, and it can have a high score because it sits right where a flood is coming. So that might give it a score of 5, let's say. And we have four hazards. So each hazard you can have a max score of like your vulnerability to it of 5. So let's say it's sitting right where a landslide might occur, that's 5. Then it's right near a river can get to it, that's another 5. Then it's highly exposed to wind, that's another 5. It's right by the sea, so it could be exposed to storm surge, that's a 5. So then that's something that could get a 20 and then be the most vulnerable out of everything else. Whereas another home somewhere along, like here in Roseau, up on the hill, might not be as exposed and may not necessarily succumb to as much damage. So just as a quick example, seeing that my dad is here is a perfect example for that, because my dad and I were both in Dominica in the storm in Goodwill, which is somewhere along, just along there. Yeah, just along up there. And then my mom was also in Goodwill, but her house was higher up on the hill, right next to the valley. So while my dad's house got a lot of roof damage, and that was pretty much it, Daddy? Pretty much just roof damage from the wind. My mom's house, which was right exposed to the cliff, roof gone, like basically most of the balcony fell apart, windows damaged, no doors survived, because it's just got the full lash of everything, whereas where we were lower down in Goodwill, it's kind of like we just got the wind that was channeling or pushing through different parts of Goodwill and around like the savannah. So that's just an example of how our house may be exposed based on its location. So, knowing the hotspots in Dominica, and of course knowing the sort of comparisons that we would want to do between Hurricane Maria just after the storm and 2021 when we did field work, we boiled it down to 5 main areas of interest based on those high hotspots, as well as incorporating like the Kalinago territory for the historical aspect. Because not only were we looking at the recovery bits of it, but we also want to know about the resilience. And particularly in the Kalinago territory, after doing interviews, we saw that there's a lot of traditional resilience, because there are different things that they do. They're sort of an island within an island, so they have their own laws and regulations within the territories, including how they distribute their houses and where they're allowed to build and different things like that. So we focused on Roseau, which was pretty much along the bayfront and 1 to 2 streets in, and then along the riverbank and 2 to 3 streets in on either side. And then Culliby Street, the entire village. Kalinago territory, we focused on Basaka, because Kalinago territory is almost the entire east coast, so of course we can do the entire thing with limited resources. Louvielle, as well as Petit Savan. Petit Savan, I put / Bellevue Shrewsbury settlement, because Petit Savan was an area that there were many landslides and there was a very tragic disaster after Tropical Storm Erica. So since then it was deemed a disaster zone. So a lot of people who used to live there were then moved to a Bellevue Shrewsbury settlement, which is a big form of resilience. So of course, hearing their stories, seeing what the new buildings look like and studying that would also add to our part of the project. So then we moved into phase 2. This is when I was in Dominica for almost the entire year of 2021. And we were collecting a lot of data there, and I'm going to take you through our process. So the research methods in field, we did a building survey or damage assessment. This definitely is going to help us look at not just the recovery and knowing, okay, how far are we 4 years post in terms of building recovery, but it's also going to help us look at the resilience. What are the resilient features of the buildings? So how many people have like window shutters, for example, in their homes? And then how many people may be on raised foundations? Because in certain communities, having a raised foundation or your house up on pillars, that's a form of resilience to flooding. So just looking at the different aspects of the buildings. Then drone image capture. This would come in handy because we collected drone images from just after Hurricane Maria, from 1 month to 6 months post. And then I collected drone images in 2021 of the same areas, because then that will then add to the analysis, comparison analysis that we're going to show you shortly. We did some in-person interviews, of course, because then that brings like the stories and the qualitative data to the quantitative science. So I really love that. And then, of course, data sourcing, gathering, and collation, collecting data while in Dominica. For the building survey, we first created a full spatial database. We used the same ArcGIS software and ArcCollector software, and we had different parameters. These are the parameters that I used when I was out onto the field of what it is that I was going to look at the buildings. So of course we had location of building status. This is just a general, I had different levels of building damage and building repair. I'm going to get into that one, that's a very important one, and building function. The structure shape and the structure material, then the roof material and roof shape. We would have noticed in Adam's presentation how important the roof shape is to different levels of resilience. It's even in our building code, they tell you the types of roofs and how high your roof should be, these sort of factors. The presence of large openings, because of course that's going to make, if you have just more like, how would I say it, like certain buildings have very, very large openings for the aesthetic of the building, but then that kind of makes you more vulnerable because then you basically have a big hole in your house where the wind can just blow down whatever door or window and then get into your house and blow off your roof. So presence or absence of large opening, the presence of a joint overhang or overhang length over 16 inches and under 16 inches. Based on the building code used in Dominica, anytime you're overhang, basically, I think they give it a grace of about 18 inches. Anytime your overhang, that's a part of your roof, starts to go past that, you're making it very easy for the wind to basically just channel up under your roof. So they'll tell you that you shouldn't build if you're overhang any longer than that, and any sort of extra overhang that you may need for a patio, for example, you build that separate to your roof. It shouldn't be attached. Then the window type, the presence of hurricane shutters, floors, the presence of raised foundations like I was just talking about, and then the foundation type. So just to look at one in detail, because obviously we can't go into all of the parameters in the detail, but building status. So even within building status, I had several different categories that help us understand the level of repair in more detail. So not damaged. These were buildings that were present since Hurricane Maria, or before Hurricane Maria, I mean, and they seem to be buildings that had minimal impact by the hurricane. So these will be buildings like Mr. Berkey's house, like what we just saw in Adam's presentation in Newtown, where besides 1-2 pieces of galvanized, his house was pretty much fine and intact. Then we had still damage. So these are buildings which have sustained some level of damage, but it's repairable. So your roof may have been damaged, probably broken windows, maybe broken doors, but it's something that can be easily replaced and easily repaired. Then we had ruins or debris not cleared. So there are some buildings that were damaged to the point, think of it like a written off car, where it was just damaged to the point where the only way you're going to repair that is if you rebuild completely. And these tend to be buildings that sustained immense roof damage. There may be parts of their walls started to cave in and fall in. There might have been rivers nearby, so they were flooded out, so even inside of their homes it was compromised, foundations might have been compromised, or maybe some of them we literally went to them and it was literally just walls remaining, and then of course by that time 4 years post, trees are overgrowing inside of it. So that's what we mean by just completely damaged, ruined, debris not clear. Debris clear is pretty much that sort of building, but they've already cleared it now, there's just a foundation left. And you'd be surprised how many of those we came across. Then we'd have temporary repairs, vacant. So what we deemed as temporary repairs, of course, immediately after the storm, especially when the helicopters started coming in, rations started coming in and so on, a lot of people, temporary repairs, if you had roof damage, you're trying to put a tarpaulin over your roof to just, make your house habitable for the time. Probably you had a broken window, you boarded up your window, you had some sort of temporary door, your door maybe needs to be fixed, you're trying to hook it to keep it closed, all sorts of stuff like that. So just some sort of temporary repair so that you could live in your house. Basically, in 2021, there was still quite a few buildings where people were still living under tarpaulins. So it's a temporary repair and they've just never been able to fix their homes since for various reasons. Then of course it's vacant versus occupied. So some of them, the temporary repairs are there because after they put the tarpaulin and fixed their roof, they might have left the country, migrated, and just never came back. The house hasn't been fixed since, so it's vacant, it's just there. And then occupied are the people who are still living in it today. Then undergoing repairs, buildings that were then being fixed when we were on the ground in 2021. Repaired, so these were, I would say, a good bit of the buildings in each community that were damaged, because remember, when they first did the damage assessment for the island, at least 90% of the buildings were damaged. So repaired would be buildings that were already basically fixed, new roof, you can see it, new windows, repainted, stuff like that, so their house is good to go. Like my dad's house. Then new building post-Maria, these are obviously buildings that were built after, and then how we were able to verify that is because we have the drone images from just after the hurricane. You can then go back and map it and know for sure that that building wasn't there. And then inaccessible or not access, these were obviously buildings that we just didn't have any access to, couldn't see them clearly enough or stuff like that. So, next. Okay, display. Great. So, once I had all that data, the first step when I'm on ArcGIS Online, so these are all the buildings that I would have plotted in Colibri, for example. And then if I click on each one, you can then start to see all the different parameters. Of course, it's coded here, but all the different parameters that I was looking at. So the building status, the type and the function, the structure geometry, like large openings, the number of floors, just everything that I was talking about before. And then of course we can also add comments. That's where we would fill in when we get to see people and interview them about their building and get more information. And then we can also add pictures to it as well. Yeah, like this one where we have like just general comments on the building that is completely damaged. There's no roof, only a wooden frame of the roof left. Then this is just a picture of the building that we were actually looking at here. This is in Colibri Street in 2021. So the drone image capture. Okay, so first we collected, well, what we could find, drone images of the different areas that we were looking at post-Hurricane Maria. So that is, again, is between 1 to 6 months post-hurricane. That's 2017 in Colibri Street. And then this is 2021 of the same area that I did in 2021. And you can already just generally looking at the images see a drastic difference. So then this is what we're going to spatially analyze in the next step. So you can see all here, all these blue tarpaulins, a lot of completely damaged roofs happening, lots of sediments. This just goes to show the level of flooding that was happening as well, almost like the entire community. And this is a community that sits flat. We would have seen on the drone image, it sits flat right between two steep mountains. So basically, there was just a lot of flooding from that small little innocent looking river right there, and then the sea as well. And then in 2021, don't mind the vegetation because this would have been October, by the way, which is rainy season, peak rainy season, and this would have been May, which is peak dry season. So don't, wonder too much about why it looks greener over there. But here, just here, you can start to see the level of repair, a lot less sediments. There's the road repaired here. A lot of more buildings have actual roofs. We can still see like one or two, like this little one here, that still have tarpaulins or they're still damaged, but generally you get the idea. Then of course we did interviews. This was a PhD student, Samuel Batut. What university is from, Adam?
From Montpellier University.
Montpellier University in France. He was also doing some work on the, what's it called? I want to say it the ethical way. What his work is on?
So similar kind of spatial analysis, but also thinking about mortality.
Right. Mortality.
Yeah, and death rates and how they're documented. But he's a physical geographer too, so he's interested in how people are affected by these different kinds of hazards. But also use that kind of drone capture. So when he got in contact with us on the project, it was kind of amazing because he was interested in collaborating. Gabrielle was just starting out on her fieldwork, was already kind of getting started, so he was able to jump on, and they became, as you can see, a very good team, and brought kind of mutual skills to the party. He has some quite good technical skills, and was able to, and at that point, Gabrielle she was honing her methodology, so he was able to contribute to that as someone who was mid-PhD, so had been thinking carefully about his methods as well. So it was a nice mutual exchange, and he's been integral to parts of this work package, but also his archival work has also informed some of the historic stuff that we've done as well. So a nice collaboration, and fortuitous in timing.
Indeed. And then this is myself on the field. This is a gentleman in Louisville his name is slipping me right now, but he was very helpful. He's a part of the Louvier Village Council.
Oh, Byron Roberts.
Byron Roberts, right. He walked out with us as well and actually showed us parts of Louvier that were the most affected, because not only, well, we can see here no roof, so a lot of wind damage, but there's a small little river behind that bush, believe it or not, and that river caused a lot of devastation and flooded out a lot of places. So these are 2 apartments, well, that whole building's been abandoned basically, but these are 2 apartments that were downstairs, and we can see the level of debris, because just think, all this has overgrown because of the amount of like river sand, for example, that was just left there. So it just goes to show the impact. The river basically burst through this downstairs here, and people had to be rescued, and he gave us the stories of everything as well. And then this is in one of the buildings in Louvier close by there. I particularly put this picture in because this is basically watermarks that were left on the wall. I'm 5'7", and this was almost like 5 feet of water from the river. So it just gives you an idea of the level of devastation that was happening on that night in Hurricane Maria. Then, once all the analysis was done, I went back to Jamaica, and then that's where phase 3 began. No, this picture is not Jamaica, this is Pitasaran, taken by me, just saying. Okay. So, the same spatial comparisons that I was talking about, and there's also a paper coming out real soon on it as well. So this 2017 image, of course this is a closer shot for presentation purposes, but I did the whole scope of Kulibistri. So we have the 2017 image and the 2021 image. Basically, it's ran through a formula. Since I was looking at building recovery, what I did with the GIS software was I extracted the buildings from each image, and of course everything is geo-referenced, meaning they're lined up to the earth, so everything lines up perfectly. And then I ran what's called a change raster analysis, and then we can end up with this sort of data. So basically, the yellow are the areas of the highest level of change or repair. So this is where we can actually visualize the level of change and then quantify it as well and know the percentages. So this will actually show you a lot of the areas where the roofs have been changed since 2017 to 2021. And then the darkest purple would be the areas of like the least change. Like these, so this would have been a concrete roof, for example. So this person would have been fine after the hurricane, so there's no change there. Whereas this one, if we remember the blue tarpaulin there, and in 2021 they fixed. So then that's what the GIS is showing us, that big yellow, these are tarpaulin, and then people who even had like partial roof damage is able to show you that. So the rest of the roof was fine, but then the yellow goes to show you like this has been fixed, so this is the level of repair that we're at. This is another example. This is a cross-section of Roseau in 2017. I think this one was only a month post the hurricane, so it's still very fresh. Loads of buildings with no roof happening there. Lots of river damage to the bridges, and that's Pottersville to your left, and then Roseau to your right. And then this is my 2021 image, where we can see the vegetation has grown back, bridges have been fixed. Of course, Roseau is the capital, so there's a lot more investment that has gone into Roseau as compared to Kulibistri, which I just showed you. But there's even like a new promenade here, river walls, a lot of buildings have been repaired. So when I run that change analysis, this is what we're looking at. So we're seeing a lot more yellow for sure happening in Roseau. A lot of commercial buildings that have been fixed. Although there was still a lot of buildings here where you can see no change. A lot of residential buildings, and actually by the end of 2021, a new apartment complex just higher up of this river has been built, where the government moved a lot of the people who were living along the riverbank to that new complex. So some of the results that we're seeing from that damage assessment that we also went out to do. So if we zoom in on Kulibistri, we can see that I think in a total, there are about 180 buildings thereabouts. and 51% of them were repaired buildings from since the hurricane. We saw about 11% still damaged. 3% were new buildings since Hurricane Maria. 4% were debris not there. So these were also damaged buildings that were just like completely written off. 4% undergoing repairs. So these were people that were still recovering in 2021, then fixing their homes. Temporary repairs but vacant again. So these are buildings that would have sustained some level of damage, probably had a tarpaulin and people not living there, so it's been abandoned. Temporary repairs occupied 8%. Just going back on the temporary repairs vacant, something that we did notice is that in Coolidge Street, because it sustained a lot of river damage in the year of Tropical Storm Erica, it was also deemed a disaster zone. So a lot of people were telling us that they can't get any new mortgages, they can't get any new loans, they can't get insurance in Coolidge Street because of the location. Obviously, it's a high-risk zone, so it's not being insured there. So there are a lot of people who probably want to fix their homes, but probably did not have the means to. So we're still living in these. It was just either abandoned or they were still living in them. So we can see 8%, and then 8% they've repaired. So these were buildings that were just completely damaged. Some 1 or 2 had been damaged since Erica, and then Hurricane Maria sort of finished the job, and then 7% not damaged. So you see, like, even if you just think about in the scale, the number of resilient buildings that were actually able to survive the storm is quite low, actually. Yeah?
Sorry, I should have asked if you were taking questions during the presentation. So
That's fine.
Going back to your last slide, you see there that you've got new buildings, and I'm thinking about sustainability and good best practice.
Mm-hmm.
How have those new buildings, or the owners of those new buildings, or the new communities being built up, how have they now been educated in terms of being resilient?
Yeah. So that's a very interesting question. So being on the ground, something that we discovered from people is that there are very mixed feelings about moving out of Coolidge Street. So while I think the government has plans of building a relocation for them, that hasn't been done yet. And we would find people who, while some would say, oh, if I'm able to move, or I will definitely move, and there are other people that say, oh, no, man, we just need a river wall, we're fine. And then there's also that level of family land and community land, and people just building where they're able to build. So that tends to be the situation for this. Some of the new buildings were like bars, for example, along the roadside, because that's a main road, so a lot of people, that's the main north to south road. So a lot of people pass along that highway, so of course it's business for them. So they're looking at it in that commercial aspect. And then some of the other people, like I said, maybe they just have the money, so they don't necessarily need to go to the bank and plan it. Because that's the other thing, also talking from planning's end of things. So while the planning division might tell people like, hey, you can't build here because it's so close to a river, it's in a disaster zone and stuff like that, planning really and truly only gets involved if there are bank loans involved and mortgages involved. So it's kind of like planning has a say, but not an entire say, because if you have the money then to actually go ahead and build, they're going to go ahead and build.
Because not talking big structures here, it could be just a 1-bedroom wall.
Yeah, it could literally be a small structure as well. So then that's the other thing. So they may know it's a disaster zone, but because they've always lived there and figured this is their home, they may not want to actually move out and figure that there's just probably something that can be done to make the community more resilient.
So in terms of the ones that are still damaged, do we have an understanding of why they're still damaged?
A lot of them are still damaged. I would say because obviously most of them are still damaged. The owners were not there. Some of the people have either left the country completely and just migrated. And again, because they may not have the money, maybe they don't have the insurance because it being in that area. They may not have the insurance or the money to fix their homes, so then they migrated and moved to some family in the US, and it's just left there.
So it would be a sliding scale in terms of the scope of damage.
Yeah.
Maybe windows to a whole roof, for example.
Yeah, so the still damage is those that's like repairable. So it's definitely your house can be fixed, but they just haven't fixed it yet. Yeah. In comparison to like the debris clear, that's just like completely written off buildings that they can't go back and build in there. They have to rebuild completely. Or it's probably along the riverbank, for example. Actually, there were a lot of buildings that were on the river, along the riverbank, that were almost like completely wiped out. So all that remained were the concrete foundations, and you would hope and parts of the concrete foundations, so sometimes some of them goes with the river as well. So you would only hope that they would not go back and build there, because that's clearly a bad zone. So, and just comparing like Roseau and Bataka with Kulibishri so that we can kind of see the differences side by side. Remember, I was telling you Roseau is the capital, heavier investment happening in Roseau, and then Bataka is in the Kalinago territory. So we have like 60% of the buildings that we surveyed were repaired in Roseau, 12% still damaged comparable to Kulibishri. And then temporary repairs, but still occupied, was 12%. So that's still really high. It's higher than Kulibishri actually. But as I said, it might change now, seeing that the people were sort of waiting for the apartments to finish for them to move into them. And then in Bataka, we see 10% of buildings still damaged. That's like repairable damage. 33% repaired. And 20% of people still living under temporary repairs. So the area that we surveyed, it was actually surprising that a lot of these homes may have just like sort of done like a little patchy job to sort of keep it together so that they can live in their house, but it actually hasn't been repaired. So that's something to think about. Just putting it as a percentage so we have an idea. Repaired buildings per 100 buildings. For Roseau, we have 59.8%, Kulibishri 50%, Bataka the lowest at 33.3%. And then we just ranked the level of repair and building repair here. And then of course, the percentage of damaged buildings with inhabitants per 100 buildings. Bataka was the highest at 19.5%, Roseau 11.5%, and Kulibishri 7.7%. So, and then moving on into resilience now. So what our data can show us about resilience, we've looked at repair, we've looked at damage. It's things like the building features like hurricane shutters, for example. In Kulibishri, we can see that 17% of people have shutters, and an astounding 83% of people don't have shutters. And in the roof material, for example, most people have used galvanized as a roof. We still have a coming up of concrete of about 5%. The shingles, it tends to be the older homes like the Tikas that Adam was talking about, 1%, and damaged or just absent. These are just damaged buildings that we can't really account for the material. But even thinking about the shutters, one thing for sure when we were speaking to people within all the communities, while shutters may be good, but just one form of a resilient architecture to like protect your windows or your doors, for example. People were talking about the cost of shutters in 2021. It's quite something. So they were saying you've used, let's say, $100,000 to repair your house, and then shutters for all your windows might come up to about $20,000 EC. So, and more. So they're saying, that additional cost of having to then put on the shutters, that's not really viable and feasible for them. Then we also noticed that a lot of the shutters that were present were on the older buildings. So like the Tika, it's like what Adam was showing us earlier, which makes us think maybe it is that we just generally need to go back into building like the older way. Because I think a lot of these buildings are minimum 60 years old and their shutters are still lasting and have gone through several storms and several hurricanes. And with that, any questions? Further questions? Any questions?
Maybe I just,
Yes.
just a small point. In rebuilding or building, less attention to style and more attention to resilience.
For sure. Like the grade of galvanized.
Because I had a roof like that, and I put a vent there to keep the roof cool. And I did all the things, straps and everything, and in less than 20 minutes, the hurricane blew off the whole roof
Yeah.
because of a little hole. If I hadn't got that hole, I probably would have been all right.
So then when you built back your house, did you include that whole?
But I changed the roof, and now I have
Exactly.
four-sided.
Exactly. So there we go. So that is, my dad definitely just pointed out a very significant thing, which is something that I'm thinking that the research can go further into. Also, probably, but this will probably involve more interviews, because it's so that you can know what was there before. Because obviously you saw for yourself most of the drone images. There was just no roof, so we can't assess what type of roof it was. But definitely, interviews, just knowing how people have adapted since is something where we see the research can go further, because that's very important. Knowing that, okay, my roof was two-sided before and now it's four, or I've switched to concrete, I've added shutters to my house, I built back and I reinforced the hurricane, I changed the grade of galvanized, all these things. So these are things I'm also looking into a bit in my paper, and it also, I guess, ways that we can track the progress of Dominica's resilience plan, because this is something else that's in the resilience plan, where they don't just want their buildings to be repaired, but they want them to be more resilient in the future. So, any other questions?
Just one point I wanted to say. About the hole in the top of your building for circulation, I also have that, but I have a concrete roof. So what happened is that during the storms, our front door and our back door were budging, because of the wind. And when one of our ventilation just a little wooden holes in the top of the building on both sides, one of them burst, and then the air pressure in the house relaxed, and the doors were not budging anymore because of that one opening that burst. And then all of us were able to safely hide from the storm. So it's interesting to see the decorational ventilation be both hazardous and helpful in that situation. But then again, I had a concrete roof, so it's not like my roof would blow up.
Yeah, and then also even what you're saying about the pressure, that's something else some people were speaking about, where if they were in, let's say they just only had one story, so they had to stay in their house and couldn't go and shelter, like downstairs, for example. They would crack, according to the direction of the wind, they would crack the windows open on one side to sort of let the wind go through the house instead of going up through the because it's the same thing with pressure. If everything is closed, the wind's still going to find a way out, so the way it finds its way out is through the top, and it will blow your roof up. So obviously, when they crack it, that they kind of just let the air flow so they can get out without having to force up. So that's probably why that happened for sure. Yeah.
So in making a similar presentation in Dominica, one of the things that came up, because we had ministries there, departments of government represented, and one of the things that came up is, okay, so why is somewhere like Bataca, let me just bring back up this slide, only at this very low percent of repaired buildings, at just a third of their buildings being repaired and representing some kind of recovery of the infrastructure there, or residential infrastructure. Is it that, what is it that's contributing to Bataca being left behind, so to speak?
Mm-hmm.
What social factors, economic factors, why isn't it given more priority in terms of, the funding, the expertise, also the help that should go into these communities. So at the very least, looking at this, 4 or 5 years later, so between 2017 to 2021/2022, after so many years have passed, why aren't we seeing a difference then in these areas? So that's important to point out, that there's a gap in the policy, or a gap with how the government is approaching its policy of making sure that the entire island undergoes recovery and repair in a good amount of time. So what's good is that now we have something that's substantive or tangible or an objective way then of saying, here are the places that are left behind, here are where the gaps are in your recovery or resilience. Here's where you can start to target, in terms of your policies for rebounding.
Any other questions?
First question, how is that then translated to the local, as in people are responsible to build that houses and look after their houses? So how are you translating this data to the local communities so that it supports them in developing their resilience? You might not be there yet, but
Yeah.
it's...
Well, I definitely think working with people like CREED, for example. CREED is the Climate Resilience Execution Agency for Dominica. So working with people like CREED, who are pretty much the agency that's monitoring if that resilience plan is being put into place. Just being able to share this data helps inform their policies, for example, and sort of guide them into, okay, well, there's been a lot of focus here, but maybe we need to refocus and look at that area. Just keeping people on track, keeping their goals on track, because I think even they, in collaboration with the planning division and so on, are helping to develop Dominica's building code, which would incorporate a lot of things like that. Because definitely when I was reading, well, it's still a draft now. I think it's being passed in legislation. But when I was reading the building code, they had drawings and explanations of the four-sided roofs, for example, and everything. The tone of the building code definitely related a lot to storms and storm resilience. So now it's a matter, I think, of engineers and the contractors to really take that building code seriously, and people crunching down on it. Because like I said before, I think that was the plea of the planning division when I was talking to them in Dominica. It's almost like I guess because it's not law per se, it's they have a say but not really. So I guess that would be a way that we would sort of help. We have to really place the importance. Of course, I guess citizens are taking up on themselves too to change things. Cause let's look at my dad, for example. Yeah. So my dad would have thought oh, my roof is fine before, and then you did screws before, and I guess the grade of galvanized and also things like that. Oh, you did screws now, straps and also stuff like that.
And that knowledge then, I suppose, it's an experiment, right? You make an experiment, you know this whole doesn't work, this is gonna, and then that information, I suppose, then passes on to other people.
Yeah.
Oh, don't do the roof like this.
My roof went in 20 minutes,
I mean, this
and
is...
all the roofs around me were solid because they
really?
were all four-sided, so I changed mine too.
So you knew then to change it.
Yeah, and I think it also passes on because because I was there with my dad in the storm and in the recovery process, I understand that now. So even before I came onto this project, I was noting that, okay, if I build a house, four-sided roof, and it has to be at least a certain number of feet, because even that is important, how high your roof is and stuff like that. So, and then hurricane tile, I didn't know anything about that before the hurricane, but now I do, and I realize the importance of it, and I realize people my age needs to know about it too, because when they start building, you almost sometimes how people think about it, they just then let's pay contractors and then the contractors do whatever they want. No, you should actually be able to monitor it and know, okay, this is what I want, this is the grade of galvanized that I need, at least 24. I think galvanized grade goes in the opposite, so the lower the number, the stronger it is and stuff like that. So if you're seeing your contractor buying 28 grade galvanized or something, that's not good. You want something 24 and smaller and stuff like that. So I guess that's how it's been passing on too.
And
Yeah,
to also follow up on your question, a lot of this information as well, we've tried to make it as accessible as possible through websites and story maps. Gabrielle has created some really, really interesting story maps and trying to look at how things are spatially with our results. What was very, very interesting too was the way that we're able to use the technology in assisting women farmers. So women farmers as, the primary these would have been women who are like the primary earners for their families. They manage their farms, they even, you know, are exporting. So they're also trying to add value to what it is that they're growing, to what they're producing. And what I thought was so interesting is, you know, just being exposed to information and technology. Like Gabrielle would have been there showing them how the drone information is collected, and they could see so much more of their farm at one instance. You know, this is the power of maps. There's so much more that you can see just in that one image. And then looking at how that aided in looking at their water harvesting plans and improving on water harvesting and so on. So I thought that was a really, really good aspect of the project itself in how the technology was able to directly assist with women farmers.
Yeah.
Oh, you partly answered my question really about how is the information being disseminated to the local people. So that was a good example of how you're helping the lady farmers. But
Yes.
is it getting to the local people in general? Like, how would someone like my dad know how best to do his route going forward with the information you've got?
And I guess sharing of stuff too, sharing of the websites. Like we had a symposium in Dominica. I mean, I know there were a lot of real strikes today that prevented people from coming, but like definitely we had people within the government sector, local people, the farmers came as well, the women farmers came as well. So there were a lot of people in a wide scope at the Dominica Symposium, for example. So, you know, that's a way that we start like disseminating the information. Yep. Any other questions? Okay, so I guess that brings us to the end of our presentation. All right, thank you all very much.
So I invite everybody to turn in this direction, not only because you're following my voice, but perhaps you're also following your noses and your stomachs, I'm not sure too. So Chaconia, Caribbean cuisine and Trinidadian local restaurant / takeaway have made us some wonderful rotis. So we've got a combination of goat for the meat eaters, mixed veg, there's a chana, and there's also one additional one which I haven't yet worked out. Or I can't quite remember, I should say. So come over, help yourself. The reason they're unglamorously in this warm, so I'll open that up now. Help yourself. You'll see that we've catered much more than what we need.